A new season, a new graphics video. I believe all of you know what a graphics video is, so I'm not going to explain what this video is about. But this time around, I'm going to do something different. I'm going to first provide a simple explanation on what each graphics setting does in Fortnite Chapter 4 Season 3. Then I will provide my recommendations for the best settings to use. So let's get into it. First, the settings I think everyone should put on no matter what type of player you are. For window mode, ideally you want full screen, but it is personal preference here. For resolution, set it to your monitor's native resolution. For VSync, turn it off. For frame rate limit, set it one setting above your monitor's max frame rate. So if your monitor's max frame rate is 144, set it to 160. For your rendering mode, set it to performance mode if you are a comp player. For everyone else, use DirectX 12, including ranked players. I will get into more on that later. For brightness, use the contrast, colorblind mode, and colorblind strength. It is all personal preference. It has no impact on your performance. For motion blur, turn it off. To show FPS, it is up to personal preference. For GPU debugging, turn it off. Latency markers, turn it off. And for NVIDIA users, NVIDIA Reflex Low Latency, turn it to NVIDIA On Plus Boost. Now onto the advanced options. For anti-aliasing and super resolution, this will make your game render at a lower resolution than your set resolution. Then use AI and other means of upscaling to increase that lower resolution to your set resolution. For DLSS or TSR mode, this is how much you want the game to render at a lower resolution. The more performance sided or lower you go with the setting, the lower your game will render at, meaning it will be lighter on your hardware and uses upscaling modes more heavily. The downside is that you might experience more jagged edges around objects and the image might not be as smooth as native resolution. For 3D dynamic resolution, do not touch this setting as it is already being set by your anti-aliasing setting. For dynamic 3D resolution, turn this on if you are using TSR. If you are using DLSS, this setting will not be available to you. For Nanite dynamically changes the polygons used on objects. Polygons is what is used to provide the textures in Fortnite. This setting alone will not have an impact on your performance, but your texture settings would. More on that later. For virtual shadows or shadows, it's just simply add shadows to a game. In shadows, you might notice different options in the settings, from medium to epic. The difference between these settings is what object gets to have the shadows applied. For example, on Shadows Epic, you will be able to see some short grass getting some shadows, while on medium, they will not at all. For global illumination, it simulates how light bounces on objects, creating shadows and bleeding colors. It is not really noticeable without the shadows, and it takes such a performance hit that this is not worth without shadows. The way the game is able to do this light balancing is through the light sources emitting rays of light that bounces off objects and provide very accurate representation of light. When you turn on global illumination, you might notice two different settings, Lumen High and Lumen Epic. The difference between Lumen High and Lumen Epic is that Lumen Epic will just create more rays of light to bounce. It is good to prevent light bleeds and inaccurate light bounces, however it will cost more computing power. For reflections, these add reflections to shiny objects in the game. This is done using the same means in global illumination, using rays of light to bounce off shiny objects, giving them an accurate lighting. This setting can be turned on if not using shadows if you want to, however it has a similar performance hit to turn on global illumination without shadows. View distance is how far away the game will begin loading textures for the area, and also affects how far away objects are rendered from a ball of light to the actual models. Textures is giving flat objects such as stuff on walls more details by increasing the amount of polygon each object has. I've also noticed that it makes builds look more 3D. For effects, this increases the amount of effects the games may render. This includes fire, builds breaking, walls breaking, ambient stuff flying around, and the amount of bees the new bees item, and etc. For post-processing, this improves motion blur, depth of field, and bloom. For hardware ray tracing, this setting is for players who want something more past Lumen Epic. Now that you all know what each setting specifically does, let's get to the actual settings recommendation part. This time around, I'm going to give the best graphics recommendations for all types of players, no matter if you play creative, competitive, ranked, or pubs. I have the settings for you. Keep in mind that the settings I'm going to give is a baseline, which is why I explained what each setting does before, so you can freely increase or decrease settings you specifically want to see. So let's get into it. Firstly, let's get to the creative players. For me, I think there is two types of creative players, the creative warriors and the creative enjoyers. If you're a creative enjoyer, go to the Zero Builds pubs section of this video, as those settings will be similar to what I recommend you guys using. If you're a creative warrior, go to the builds pubs section. Now onto the competitive player. I classify you as a competitive player if you play a lot of FNCS or similar tourneys. For you guys, I recommend you going to performance mode or DirectX 12 with everything on low. If you are playing on DirectX 12, you guys also have the leverage to increase some settings if you want to have a little bit more graphics fidelity and do not like the look of the flat mobile builds that performance mode has. The settings I would also recommend you increasing is anti-aliasing, nanite, view distance, and textures. Now for the ranked players. I classify you as a ranked player if you mostly play ranked, but also play pubs if you like to go non-sweaty. For you players, I recommend DirectX 12 as you can change settings on the fly in-game very easily. If you are a Zero Builds ranked player, you can also try turning on shadows, global illumination, and reflections if you wanted to, since Zero Builds require less processing power due to not needing to render all the builds and their building animations. If you are a Builds ranked player, you can also try turning on those settings, but be aware that due to the game needing to render all the builds and the building animations, you might need to turn them down. And if you're not playing ranked and playing some casual pubs, feel free to use settings in the pub section of this video. Now for the settings for pub players. First, we're going to do the Zero Builds pubs. For Zero Build players, I recommend for DLSS performance or TSR low if you do not have Nvidia. DLSS performance is absolutely fine, quality if you got the extra computing power and one less jagged edges. And for those who do not have an Nvidia graphics card, TSR low is good enough and not that noticeable compared to the other settings. TSR epic if you really want less jagged edges, if you know where to look and got the extra computing power. For dynamic 3D resolution, if you got TSR, turn it on. For nanite, turn it on. For shadows, turn to medium. For global illumination, turn to lumen high. Reflections to lumen high. View distance to medium. Textures to epic, effects to epic, and post-processing on low. Be aware, with the new season and the new jungle biome, you might need to start turning down settings to accommodate the new foliage in the biome. For those who don't know, foliage is the trees, leaves, and grass. The two settings you might want to turn down is textures, which provide textures for the actual leaves on the trees, and effects for the falling leaves and any ambient particles in the air. You can also turn down shadows and global illumination, but the impact these settings have on the new biome compared to the other biomes are very minimal and should be turned down just for that. If you're experiencing lag in the new biome, consider turning down shadows and global illumination overall. Now for build pubs, you guys will be using very similar settings to Zero Builds, but instead of effects on epic, turn it to low. With the effects setting affecting builds breaking debris and building animation, effects can cause a major lag in the middle of a build fight, so you want to turn the setting down. Now that we have covered every type of player in Fortnite, I'm going to give a recommendation for settings you should start turning down if you are not reaching your ideal FPS or if you start lagging. Be aware that I'm giving these settings in order of what I believe is the setting you should prioritize turning down. However, if you would like a specific setting on for until the last moment, you are free to change this order. Hardware ray tracing. DLSS or TSR. Do not turn these settings off, just turn them to the lower setting. View distance. Textures, effects, global illuminations and shadows, reflections, nanite, then performance mode. And that is all the graphics setting recommendations I have for you today. If you got any questions regarding what a specific setting does, why I recommend a specific setting, or any other questions, feel free to ask me in the comments section below. Be sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss any videos like this, and I'll see you guys all in the next video.